Did you know that kinky wellness is integral to your self-development? Hi, welcome to the Partition, home of Kinky Wellness, the ultimate destination to explore the integral connection between kinky wellness and your personal development. I'm your host and kinky wellness coach, Dana Shergill, and each Monday I bring on a special guest to dive into specific aspects of kinky wellness. From unconventional practices to thought-provoking conversations, I'm here to break down barriers and redefine the boundaries of wellness and pleasure. Don't forget to join me for my solo shows on Wednesdays, where I explore even further into the multifaceted layers of kinky wellness. So let's strip away the shame and taboo together and have an open conversation about it. Hey, and welcome back to another episode of the Kinky Wellness Podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome back fan favorite Ancilla from Ancillary Kink Support. A passionate sexual wellness educator and erotic writer, Ancilla is back to share her experiences with erotic writing, including the unique challenges in crafting kink-based literature. Ancilla also explores the reasons behind the heavier censorship of erotic writing compared to other forms of sexual expression, and discusses how intersectionality plays a crucial role in the realm of erotic art. So without further ado, let's welcome Ancilla back to the show. Welcome back to the show, Ancilla. How you doing today?
Hi, Dana. I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to have you back on the show, and we're going to learn a little bit more about you because we're going to be discussing erotic writing in general. So before we begin, I kind of wanted to get your perspective as your history with erotic writing and why you lean towards erotic writing.
I guess I should start with when I started writing erotica. It was when I was very young. I'll redact the age just so that this doesn't get uncomfortable for anyone. But so initially, when you're really young and when you gain like an understanding of your own sexuality in more bodily terms, then you have language for it. You need a method to express it that's not really extended to young people. So the only way for me to truly make sense of my sexuality was to start writing about it. And when you feel it when you're young, you don't feel it in terms of this is what this is coming from, this is the root of this behavior. You don't think of it in those terms. You think of it in terms of acts and feelings. And erotica is the writing of acts and feelings associated with sexuality. So I guess that's where it started. And then as I got older, I started writing on literotica, and then I started writing on FetLife, and then I started writing a bunch of books a bunch of erotic books. And I guess it became like my preferred genre for a certain type of writing. Like I enjoy erotic writing in some different ways. First of all, the genre itself, I feel like it's a bit limited in its scope based on how erotica is written. It's always very single-minded. Like the only goal is to get you off, and then everything in the writing serves that goal, which ends with a ton of objectification, but also a lot of tropes and not a lot of like good detailed writing. Whereas sexuality, like everything else, exists within, well, first it exists within personal relationships within yourself, then within like a structure of society and politics and everything that influences it, and all the things that sort of also aesthetically add to it, beautify it, and all of that. So when I write erotica, it's sort of like that. It's not just the act, it's not just what's happening between two people or more than two people, but also how it fits into the world, how it fits into my life, how it fits into everything else that's going on with me. So it's like humanity, society plus erotica, and that's how I write it. And as a genre that really appeals to me because sex isn't it's a space, sexuality and sexual arousal, which is when people go to erotica, is when they want to feel turned on. It's a space that's really disarming. Like it's a space in which you let go of certain notions and you're already committed to the willing suspension of disbelief, which means that learning about the world in that space, it's just a very interesting and open-minded approach, I think. So I like to go in sexual, but also I want people to think about sexuality and life in the world more deeply. And I find this is the most disarming space in which to do it.
And do you find that you bring in cultural norms or social taboos that you've experienced into your writing, or have they influenced
A
you in any
lot
way?
of gender relations, like I do bring in a lot of gender relation based stuff, and also the politics of a country and how, like sometimes you live in a certain place. Like I move around a lot, so geographically, the environment around me keeps changing. Sometimes I live in really big cities. So, like, the sociosexual script there is very different from if I live in a really small town like I do right now. So, all of those things have influence on like how I write. They show up there because it is my life. And also, I tend to write what I've been calling erotic nonfiction, which is basically like an eroticized version of my own sexuality and my own sex life, but not like writing about my sexuality in the sense that this is empowering and this is not. It's more like writing it like narrative fiction, like creative nonfiction. So that's why I've been calling the genre that. I don't know that it exists. I haven't really seen it. It's like a combination of confessional writing and like memoir writing, but like sexuality is at the center of it.
Mm. And do you find that there are any challenges when you're going into erotic writing and kink-based literature that other romance literatures don't necessarily face?
Well, I guess audience and where you find it is one of the questions, right? Like what I write for my day job, for instance, or what I write under my real name. I write under two names, just to clarify for anybody who's listening. I write under my real name, which is not part of this space, and then I write under the name Ancilla, which is like I guess my pseudonym for sexuality and kink. So under my real name, I don't have to go look for an audience because the audience, it's more general. Like it's like anywhere you write about those things is okay. Whereas for writing about sexuality, there are particular spaces. Like for writing erotica, which is essentially like what the written word form of porn, you have lit erotica, and then you have various, like for kink-based writing, you have FetLife. So you have to go there, and then your audience is generated there, and then your audience is also as anonymous as you are. And I guess that creates a weird sort of paradigm. And basically, I can keep doing this, but when I have to talk to people about what I do, it's difficult to explain where these people are who are reading this. And like, that's a strange, sort of unexpected challenge to it. But when it comes to the writing itself, I don't find writing romance or erotica very different from each other. Because, first of all, I guess for me, sexuality and romance are deeply intertwined. Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's hard to extricate one from the other. So the way that I write sex is the way that I write love, and the way that I write love is the way that I write sex. So in the process, there isn't that much of a difference. In my writing style, also not that much of a difference.
I see. And when it comes to this, there's so many different types of platforms for creators to use, but do you find that as an industry that there's an unfairness with the romance novelist writers and the erotic literature writers?
So, like, basically, the thing is that a lot of these genres, like romance and I guess also erotica, are associated with women more than any other genre of writing. Or perhaps like certain nonfiction, like self-help and parenting books, are also associated with women more than anyone else. But all of them tend to be at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to like how literally seriously should we take this form of writing. So I think the unfairness is like to the group as a whole. Yes, with erotica, there's a secondary challenge in that we tend not to take what we read about sex seriously. And even when it's in an educational format, perhaps we take it more seriously. But when it's literally in the format where it's designed to arouse you above all else, we don't expect to get anything deep or meaningful, or the same way you get when you read like war literature, like you read Farewell to Arms, and there's a story of love in the middle of that, but you still are reading it for what you think is like serious literature. It's like for love and for war and to understand society as it was. But when we read for arousal, we don't think that you can get that out of it.
Is that what you're looking to change, is to get that depth in your writing?
I think it's not just my writing. I think there are other writers who do sort of attempt to do that, but it's not taken as seriously. Also, there is a small audience for it. Also, it's difficult to pitch something like that to a mainstream editor. Like, you have to sort of like, for me, what happened was that I accidentally built an audience. I never intended to do that. I just wanted a space to write what I was really wanting to write about, which I'd been writing about my entire life, but I just didn't have like an audience to put it out to. And Literotica was the first place where I did. And it was there that somebody suggested that, because of this kind of stuff you write, because the stuff I write is it's very sadomasochism heavy. It's also like a lot of psychosexual fetishism. Like, I don't know, I guess they call it. mind fucking, but I really don't like that term. So it's that kind of thing, and it's a lot of power exchange. So Litrotica is very broad. So FetLife was a more singular minded space. But I just was writing there because where else are you going to write about stuff like that? And then you just accidentally, because I was surprised by people's reaction to the kind of things that I was writing, because it's not your conventional erotica. It's not like fuck me in the ass and put this in my mouth. It's not like that. It's really identity focused and it's really relationship focused. And yes, it's extremely filthy. Like I'm very explicit in my writing as well. Like it's not like beating around the bush. It's not trying to make just, sometimes you write erotica in this way that is like high-minded, so it has to be beautiful only. It can't be cross, and it can't be in your face, and it can't be explicit, it can't be gritty. But I'm attempting to retain all of these elements because sex is all of that.
I agree with the fact that it's okay to be explicit, and that's the thing about it. And you mentioned something about mindfuck. I hear that so much in our industry, and I was wondering why you don't like that term specifically.
I don't know what it means, and I can't figure it out because, like, I know what I mean when I say psychosexual interplay. I mean that there is there are emotions that are being deliberately evoked and states of mind that you're being deliberately put into that make you question and wonder about yourself and the other person and the world and how that interacts with each other. I know that's what that means. Whereas mind fucking, I don't know what it means. Do you mean that you're trying to confuse me, gaslight me? Like, what is it? I'm good with all of those specifically, but when it's just that, it's too broad and also it's too ambiguous. It's like, I don't know what you mean.
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to erotic literature and writing, what are your opinions on it being more heavily censored than other masturbation aids like sex toys, pornography, or lubes?
So I think, first of all, it depends on, well, who's benefiting from this product, right? Like, so long as sexuality and sexual products have served men, it's been easier, not easy, but easier, depending on the cultural norms surrounding it, to get it out in the open and to be able to sell it and to not have people make noise about it. I mean, we can see it in really little things like male nipples versus female nipples, right? Like it's all around us where censorship is more heavy on a certain body type than it is on a different body type. So we've also been more accepting in general of like men's pleasure being vital to men. Like, with the entire boys will be boys narrative, there's also a secondary narrative, which, like, I remember when I was really young, somebody in my family had like touched me, and I told my mother, and my mother tried to put it in context for me by explaining to me that this person is like helpless against their urges, and that's normal. And I should be more understanding because they are helpless. So this helplessness, we as a society feel some responsibility to help men deal with it. Whereas with women, it's always a choice to engage in pleasure. And that choice comes from like a place of, well, I'm gonna, like the way that it's viewed, it has a little bit to do with she can live without this. Why is she doing this?
Mm.
So it's like a decadent choice. And I think that decadence is why censorship on like women focused pleasure products is higher.
Well, I find that quite interesting because from my perspective, the most demographic that are reading that is women. And I've never actually thought about it in the way that you just put it, that it's because it's not really for men and the men aren't really reading it, then there's not really this push to get it out there in the same way that masturbation toys are.
Yeah, like for instance, with erotica, with erotic literature, with erotic writing, nobody really makes a lot of money. Like the creators never really make a lot of money, and the creators tend also heavily to be like women and GNC folk. Like it's not men. There are some, but okay. What I'm saying is that when it comes to this field in itself, because of its consumers and its creators, we've just sort of relegated it to like the recesses of the internet. It's like, okay, there is a ton of content out there. Even now, there's a ton of AI generated erotic content out there because I guess in some ways, the formula for erotica is really easy, right? You just have to get some people in there, get some clothes in there, describe it a certain way, get some acts in there, and then if you can give this much information to an algorithm, it can write it. But we wouldn't feel the same way if it was writing like a literary masterpiece, which really I just wonder why the two cannot coexist. But I think the reason the attention is absent is sexism. And I guess there is something to, like, I'll give you an example. I post some pictures sometimes of the stuff I do, and I do some writing about the stuff that I do. And for a really long time, the writing, alongside people who genuinely appreciate it, there is a group of people who are very disturbed, extremely unhappy with like the representation, and also just they just don't want it to exist in that form because it's like I guess it's too jarring or challenging to process. Whereas when I take a picture of the exact same thing and I put it up there, it's less jarring. It's more popular. It's more, this is just an image. And I think that's because writing has this ability to, well, be really specific. And what we retain in memory is much higher when it's specific. Like even when the way we respond to music, the music that really appeals and remains with you, it either evokes something extremely specific or it refers to something really specific. So I think because of that explicit nature of writing, it also tends to ruffle more feathers if people read it. So a large reason why I think a lot of writers do get away with the kind of things that we do is because people don't actually read long form.
Mm. And how do you handle that type of criticisms or opinions that people might not understand what you're doing or appreciate what you're doing?
I guess I do always attempt to assess my work for validity. Like, for instance, if somebody expresses a valid opinion, such as this is seeming like a glorification of X and Y, and for this reason, I will attempt to read what I've written and see if in any way it does that. The way that I write, I tend to individualize it to a very high degree and make it very clear the context in which these things are taking place. So it's not like, even when I write like dubious consent or like consensual non-consent, it's written in a way that it is clear that it's consensual non-consent. I think the reason it makes people uncomfortable is because if you know what you're going into and it gives you something different than what you wanted it to give you, you didn't want to be confronted in that time or space. It's more disturbing than it would have been otherwise. Also, when I am getting punched in the face in a video and you're watching because you searched for punching videos, that's just what you were expecting. But when you read it, you weren't expecting to get to know me as a person first. So when you did that, it had a stronger impact on you, which is often the case. And I try to engage with people who come to the discourse like respectfully. The people who don't, well, you don't understand my sexuality, don't read about it. It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, is there any specific pieces of literature that have influenced you or made a significant impact on what your writing style is?
I think I find a lot of relatability with both Anais Nin and Sylvia Plath. And I realized that about both of them by reading their journals because there are few things in common. There is an obsession. I am writing compulsively and I have my entire life. There isn't a moment when I'm not doing it. Like it's just, I'm talking to you right now, but the way that it's processing in my head is that I'm writing what we're talking about.
Mm.
So I see in both of their writing that same obsession with the act itself. I mean, nobody needs to write a bunch of books and also 9 volumes of journals. Nobody needs to write that. But the fact that you had to is something I deeply understand. So I guess I also really enjoy their writing, in particular their journal writing, because it's so encompassing. Like there is a beautiful thing to writers in that they have extreme levels of whimsy, but you wouldn't know it when you read their work.
Mm.
You would know it if you also write and have for a certain amount of time. So like I really enjoy how far they were willing to take everything that they were, notwithstanding some tragic life-ending situations. But what I mean is the way that they were approaching writing and life itself. It's really beautiful because you can't tell whether they're just doing the things they do in order to be able to write them, or they're happening and then they're writing them. And I also can't tell with me. So I feel relatability with them. And I guess that's your answer.
Mhm. Well, what type of books are you writing with right now?
Okay, so I'll just talk about my erotic novels. I write erotic novels, but I also write like educational novels. So we'll leave the educational ones aside for this discussion. So I have three erotic novels, and the fourth one is going to be out soon. So the first one, it's called Vignettes of Violence, and it's the first volume, and the one that I'm releasing soon is the second volume of that. And that's like, I've been calling it an erotic autobiography, and it's of like one particular relationship and everything surrounding it. So like the way that that's written is that I do actually write a journal, and I have for 20 years. So I have 20 years worth of journals, and I write about relationships that I'm in very actively, like almost daily, and the sexual aspects of them. So I also have all of the writing. So like I put them together and then I reworked it a continuing narrative. So basically it's like a journal, but also a memoir, and it's like that. So that was the first volume of that I released 3 years ago, I think. And then the second book is called Queerotica, which is like it's a compilation of 21 stories, but they're for queer people, but it's written in a way that it doesn't fetishize the gender orientation or the sexual orientation of queer people. It's like truly it's an exploration of fetishism, just that the sexual orientations and the gender identifications of the people are not what you would expect from like cis het porn. That's it. Like it's very focused on the sexuality of people as opposed to the identity of people. And I guess that was something that's sort of missing in like the queer space. Like queer porn for queer people is uh, porn, maybe writing less so, some of it, of course. So that's that. And then the third book is it was like a writing experiment. So like, oh, this is a weird one actually. So I don't know if I can explain it without being blasphemous. Like it's a blasphemization of Lent. So the thing is that my partner and I were sort of not working for 2 weeks in April, and Lent was happening. So we wondered what it would be like to reenact that in our relationship in a really weird way. And then I wanted to write it in real time, like as it was happening. So like we kept it for 14 days, and I did write that book in real time. And then at the end of it, I published it. And then, so that's what it's about. I've been calling that one erotic nonfiction. It literally is. But it was kind of fun to write it in real time because, like, I mean, I was also going through all of that stuff that we were doing, and like simultaneously, it's a fun physical, emotional, and writerly challenge at the same time. And then the next one that I'm working on right now, so that's the second volume of Vignettes of Violence. So the first volume goes from the years 2015 to like mid 2018, and this one does like mid 2018 to 2020. So then I have like two other volumes that I'll do afterwards.
So it's very much you. Like these are very connected to you and very much your life. And I think that's
Very
great that you
much.
were writing
Yes,
as you go. That sounds like a fun 2 weeks you had.
it was fun. It was also nuts, but it was really fun.
Now, how does intersectionality of art and sex play out in erotic writing?
Okay, so at least for me, and first of all, before we discuss this further, when I say sex, I want to be really clear that I don't mean it genitally. I mean sexuality, I guess, more than I mean sex. Even though when I do say sex, I mean any form of sexual engagement, even when it's like completely non-physical, that like evokes connection and is ongoing between two parties. So when I say that I'm writing about sex, I'm writing about all of that. And all of that and art are sort of similar to me in terms of what they evoke. So when I say art, obviously, the way that I create art is by writing. So that is primarily my reference to art. I don't mean to disqualify other forms of it, but I'm just trying to explain that I have to discuss it from the perspective at which I come from it. And I come at art from writing. So what I experience when I'm writing is like, it's like this debilitation where you completely surrender to the process. Like I just get up and I start doing it, and then I just let it happen. If there's a silly thought in my head, I go with it. If it's a strange direction I want to take, I go with it. If I want to reenact Lent for 14 days, I'd go with it. Like it's this very free space where I just go with it. And sexuality is also that, it's the same thing. So putting the two of them together, it's just like a no-brainer to me. Like it's just like it feels like those two things belong together. And with art, you're trying to do a few things. There is an aesthetic value to it, and I do see an aesthetic value to things that are challenging and jarring. and also beautiful. And I am at the core of my writing style. I'm a romantic writer, so like my writing is laden with like aestheticism, symbolism, and like all of that kind of sort of beautiful ornamental writing style. So there is that aesthetic aspect of art which I think also exists in sex. And then there is the means to get at people and their brains and what they're thinking, and like both those spaces, because we all experience our sexuality so innately, even if you don't identify with what I do, at the core of our humanity, I can get to the place where you experience that as well. You experience that emotion. So, like, writing sex allows you to really go into that space and access other people, and the ability to get people to think about themselves as less weird than they thought they were, more weird than they thought they were, more relatable to other people than they realized they were, is really great. And I think that is the point of art to some degree.
And do you find that that's what people reach out to you with predominantly? Is that this is relatable?
I think the most common feedback is that I never understood that thing and now I get it. I think that's the most common feedback. It's also like I never expected that I would have a reaction, especially an aroused reaction to something like that, but I did, and now I understand it.
And do you find that that's part of the misconception of erotic writing, that people think that they're not going to relate and then they read it and they're like, you know what? I actually kind of like this.
I think because when we search for erotic writing, much like pornography, we're going in for a specific reason. Rarely do people read erotica for leisure. So it's usually for a purpose, and the purpose is maybe masturbatory nature, but it's definitely titillation related. So
Mm.
when you go in with that perspective, then you don't look for it. You look for specific words. You're like, I'm turned on by this act. So let me search for erotica that's related to this act. And then when you go in and you find exactly that, then you're not going to change your mind or realize that you like anything different. With erotica, it's harder to classify. And when it's more like a genre where you're also reading it for the story, then you can surprise yourself by what you respond to. I mean, I think sexually, a lot of our responses come down to what do you want to feel. A lot of the things that we like come down to what do you want to feel. And we have a very conventional understanding of what you can do sexually in order to feel that thing. But there's also 20,000 other ways to get there. And I guess we just don't consider those 20,000 other ways as being relatable to us or being an option or even required.
Hmm. And what other misconceptions do you find that there is around erotic literature in general?
I think this one is less a misconception and more something that is true and does happen, that a lot of erotic writing is really shitty. I think it's the same as like pornography. A lot of it is just bad. And I think that's not just erotic writing. Any art form, maybe even, has a very low barrier to entry, which is a good thing in some ways. But in some ways, it also means that if I spend 20 years writing every day and going to school for it, and then working in the industry, and then doing it every day, and you are sitting on a mountain one day with a notepad and you write a poem, we are both writers. And we both say that with confidence. Honestly, the latter is more likely to say it with confidence than I would. I mean, at this point I can, but like even 5 years ago, before I had any books out or like anything reviewed or anything, I felt uncomfortable making that claim. So I think because anyone is allowed to be a writer, it just means that anyone is also allowed to be contributing to the field of erotica. And it's an accessible field. Like it is an easy thing to write because you know what you like sexually. So there's just a lot of bad writing. But I think, again, not erotica specific. There's just in general a lot of bad writing. And when I say this, I do want to make sure that I don't mean that you have to be classically trained in order to be a good writer. I think you have to work at it. I think in order to be a good writer, like anything else, you have to work at it. You have to show up every day. You can't just wait for inspiration. You have to just put the work in, even on the days that it's really bad, even on the days that it's hard, and even in the days when the outcome is just shit. I think that is missing, but I think that's a challenge with writing in general. And then what's popular when it comes to erotic writing, like for instance, to read my work, you sort of have to commit because they're not short pieces ever. And the few times they are short, also like there's a reason they're still going to make you uncomfortable in some weird way. So like that's my writing. And then other people I know that write erotica that's truly compelling and beautifully written, it requires using your brain and other parts of your body at the same time. And I guess that's not a moment in which we want to do that. I guess not a lot of people want to get off and think about things seriously at the same time.
Hmm.
So that's one of the challenges that I face personally.
Now, with your writing, it seems to be on the extreme spicy side of the scale when it comes to erotic novels. And do you have any cultural or ethical considerations that you take into account when you're writing your stories?
I can't sell any of my books in India.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, so are your market primarily in the States then?
Yes, it's all over the. So I'm a lot of my books are banned here. Like I just can't sell them. But also, my readership in India never was particularly large. There is some degree of it that exists in India, but it's not particularly large. So even for the past 10, 12 years, it hasn't been as Indian as I want it to be also. So did earlier this year or last year, I did start like just I hired like a guy at a printing press and just started having him print copies of my books so that I could physically distribute them in India, which is not super duper legal. Like it's more like there is room to ask the question, is this art or is this porn? And within that question somewhere is my existence. So if I do someday have to like defend that, that's the route I'm going to have to take. So the distribution in India is obviously not really great. The sales in India also comparatively haven't been so high, but that's because you have to physically be where I am in order to buy the books. And also, even if I do sell them online, I have to deliver them to you, but there's no like portal where you can go and register to buy them, like not like Amazon, which is where I sell everywhere else, or it's not on Kindle. So that's a bit of a challenge because I really would like to get it out more where I live. But yeah, what you
So,
gonna do?
well, in regards to that, so what are the laws in India around this type? Like, if you could argue that it's art, then it might be okay, but is it pornography is super censored in
So
general? Like an
so the distribution of pornography is illegal and it is super censored. They also like do an annual list of websites that are blocked. So like in some states, for instance, you can't even access FetLife without a VPN. You have to use that in order to get on that website.
Mm.
And there's some broadcast servers that won't like they'll pre-block them for you. But a lot of it, like a lot of the censorship in India has to do with self-regulation. So like if there's a directive that indicates that certain things might be a problem for you in the future, you preemptively just take care of it yourself as the provider. So that's where a lot of it is happening also. And there has been some precedent. There have been some art exhibits that have caused like noise from certain factions of society, which is where like this whole question of art versus sex arose for the first time.
Mm.
Is it's within those lawsuits. So I did consult my lawyer because I like him and also myself and my liberty. So what he gave me to understand on the subject was that I am not technically doing anything illegal so long as I believe that I'm not distributing pornography and this is art. And I do believe that.
Hmm. It's so interesting. Again, I feel like we've talked about this before, but the Kama Sutra, so how does that come into play? Because that, I guess, is about sex as well. And it's just so, it's interesting to me that you could have that, but yet flash forward to 2024
I'm so glad
and
you asked the question.
pornography is just like, no,
Didn't
you
we
can't.
discuss the Kama Sutra before we did, right?
I think me and you did, but I'm not sure if we did it on recording, but I know you and I have.
I have strong feelings about the Kama Sutra because, you know, like the way that it's viewed is
Hmm.
that it's a sex symbol. But if you actually read it, it has many, many problematic elements. And what it's really attempting to teach you, also, this is my literary criticism take on the book, is that what it's really trying to teach you is to have sex within the code of morality in which sex is permitted. And in that case, please use these 64 positions when you do so. Because a lot of it, so like they condemn oral sex, for instance, in the Kama Sutra, it's okay for like a Brahmin man to receive it from a lower caste woman, but not from like. So there is a lot of weird elements to the Kama Sutra, which I think don't get discussed as much.
Mm.
Very sexist elements, very casteist elements, very who's allowed to have sex with whom and have it be pure elements. So I think we've just latched on to the idea of sex in the Kama Sutra and failed to read the rest of the book. It's basically like when you get porn magazines and you just look at the pictures. I actually wrote about it once. I got a lot of hate for it, but also a lot of, didn't know about that.
Well, so is that distribution allowed? Like, where is that book sitting in
Of
India right
course,
now?
because that's religious text, no? That's of course it's allowed.
Oh, okay. So, if it's hard or religious, you'll be okay, but not pornography.
I mean, we have naked cave paintings, but like those are allowed because it's obviously art and it's
Mm,
obviously surrounding religious places. Like some things are also it's allowed when it's like titillating to men and bringing in tourism and like adding to the
mm,
mystique of your country. It's less allowed when it simultaneously puts your country on trial while it is because my sexuality, mine individually, features very heavily in my writing, right? And my country features very heavily in my sexuality. And it's not always in a great way. So I guess that's more disturbing because it's more real. Like it's the reality of sex that we are so afraid of, right? Because even with pornography, we like all the airbrushed, posed, all of it, all that kind of porn. What is it really attempting to erase?
mm.
And I think it's the same way.
Yeah. Well, what other advice do you have for aspiring erotic writers based on your own experiences?
First of all, my advice to writers is aspire to be erotic writers. Like nobody aspires to that, right? Like nobody aspires to that. So like in the journals of Anais Nin, she talks about this period in her life where she's attempting to like set up a printing press and she's attempting to get rich via her writing or at least make enough money to survive. And then she chances upon like this environment where she's living with a bunch of other writers. I think Henry Miller was there, and I think Salvador Dali was there at one point. And like they're all just living in this house, and none of them can make money via their work. So they start writing like commissioned erotica for specific clients. And then she likened that to like a path to sainthood because like it channeled all of their insanity and all of their creative energy into the space where they could finally function as human beings because they were able to get that out. And I'd really like to live in an environment like that where like like erotic writers can sit together and opine about writing as if it's a serious business. And I don't think that happens enough. Like you can do that as a writer of contemporary fiction, you can do that as a writer of political fiction or just like a journalist even, but you can't so much do it as an erotic writer because either it'll always be about like agenda, it'll always be about this is what we have to achieve, this is who we have to empower, this is who, which is good and it has its value and it also has an impact on my own writing. Or it will be about, well, how do you get this to more people, how do you get more clicks on it, more hits on it, and how do you get it more popular? So it'll always be in those spaces that discussions of erotic writing will exist, whereas I'd really like it to exist in a space where we're arguing over metaphors even though there's a naked woman on the floor. Like I want it to exist in that space, which is not advice to erotic writers, but it is advice to writers to consider the erotic genre as a field of exploration. I wouldn't have done it myself if I hadn't had no other outlet for my sexuality starting when I did it. And then I guess I never would have done it to the degree that I had done it if I hadn't accidentally chanced upon an audience that was like, yeah, this is weird and I like it. Like, I think there are more audiences out there than you realize if you put the work into your writing as opposed to the work into how do I get my writing to be more popular. First of all, when you focus on the process and you love the process, nothing will ever give you as much dopamine as the process. Nothing. Not posting it, not being super popular, nothing will give it to you. So I guess that's just writing advice in general. Love the process. And if you don't change the process, like change it until you find one that makes you super happy. And then just try it because you don't know where you might find an audience. I certainly didn't expect to find an audience where I did find an audience. And I definitely didn't intend to take it so far that like 12 years later, I would have two different identities and like two separate sets of taxes to file somehow. Like I certainly didn't intend to take it to that point, but you never know what might happen.
And it's
So,
great. It's great that you did that because obviously you've connected with a bunch of people. And I think that's what I love about erotic writing is that, it makes people feel not so alone.
Yeah, it serves a lot of purposes, I think. It's also like it's like being to, like on an erotic writing comment thread, all of the curtains have already been pulled back.
Mm,
So you can, and some people take this in a bad direction and take it as an excuse to be really nasty and say horrible things or like leave their masturbatory fantasies there projected onto you. But some people really take it as an opportunity to expose themselves to that degree and like feel like this is an okay space to do that because it's already been done. So
mm,
that is one of the great features of erotic writing. And for that, I think like an anonymous audience is even not a bad thing. Like there are such things as too intimate and too personal to say out loud, which is the basis for confessional writing. The basis for it is that you should feel like you're in my brain, and that's deeply uncomfortable. And there is no reason for you to be that uncomfortable in return. You can
mm.
just enjoy someone's willingness to be that uncomfortable. So you can retain some degree of anonymity. Like, I understand why you wouldn't want to give it up. I have a great detachment from what I write and how I live. It's just a writing process. But because of that, when I write about myself, even really deeply personal, intimate stuff, it doesn't feel so much like it just feels like anything else. It feels like I'm talking about drinking tea or walking. But that's just because of that feeling of like, yeah, this is a character, even though it's exactly me, it's exactly what I'm doing. But because the focus is so writing oriented, I'm only focusing on the craft. Whereas it's not the same when you're consuming and commenting, I guess. It's a bit like you were you when you read it and you're still you when you're commenting, and exposure to that level is not necessary, but welcome when people do choose to share. And that has been a very cool aspect of this. Like people sharing their feelings about their sexuality and how they feel in response to not being the only weird person in the room, but also like sometimes some things are weird in the sense that, oh, I'm really into needles. And sometimes things are weird in a really specific way that, like, I like to braid someone's hair and cover it in jasmine oil and then sniff it while I fuck them. Like sometimes things are weird in that way. And I think in that space, when people feel supported by the knowledge that everybody else has like really explicit, specific fantasies, that I think is a supportive space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you again so much for coming on the show. It's always a blast when you're here.
I enjoy talking with you very much as well.
Well, where can my listeners find you?
FedLife Instagram, you can subscribe to my Patreon. It's all under Ancilla L. Also, my website, it's called ancillary-kink.com. I guess in terms of what I'm doing, I have a new book coming out probably next week. It's being checked by Amazon right now for potential issues.
Mm.
So you could buy that. It's the second volume of a book that's already out, Vignettes of Violence, which is the erotic autobiography. It's very power exchange focused and a lot of romance too, and some strange snippets about life in India. Like, I guess it's just a story of two people having really extremely filthy sexual encounters with each other, but also deeply loving each other and having a bunch of pets and like moving from place to place. So if you just want like a really slow-paced TV show, but at the end of the episode you get to masturbate, like it's probably the book for you then.
Well, great. I will put all the links in the podcast description. And for my listeners, thank you so much. And you guys know what to do. I'll see you on Wednesday. As always, stay kinky. P.S. If you're interested in learning more about how kinky wellness is the evolution of sexual health and healing, be sure to visit www.kinkywellness.ca, where you can pick up your very own copy of the Kinky Wellness textbook and discover how kinky wellness is a healthy outlet for aggression, imagination, and attention.